NSFW. Prison guards of Reddit. What's the most disturbing thing you've dealt with? Former prison guard. I had to escort a new prisoner to medical. I had no idea why until we got to medical. He had bandages all over both legs, and he walked stiff-legged. Couldn't bend his legs. When he sat down, the nurse started removing bandages to expose rotted, abscessed flesh. He was a heroin addict, and was injecting in his legs. His legs were so swollen and gangrenous that the smell almost put me down. When he tried to bend his right leg, the skin split, and infection oozed all over the floor. The doctor looked at me and immediately called for another guard to come into the room. I asked what was wrong, and she said, "You're going into shock. I need you to leave before you pass out." Surprised at what she said, I protested, but she demanded that I leave. On my way out, I started to feel lightheaded. I looked in a mirror and noticed that I was sheet white. Normally a brown guy. I've seen people hanging. I've seen people stabbed and shot. I saw the guy blow his head off with a shotgun. When I was in the Corps, I've pulled burned bodies out of a crashed CH-53E. This, by far, was the worst thing I've ever seen. Worked as a corrections officer. Guy got busted for sexual assault of a minor. Figured everyone else in the tank was on similar charges, so began talking openly about it, feeling he was safe. We had to subdue 5 guys who jumped him in the rec yard. Guy was sent to the hospital. As he was fairly unresponsive, he was sent to protective custody after that. Not me, but my uncle. He has been a prison guard for 10 years. He has seen countless of things, but there was one thing that has always stuck with his mind. A little back information. My uncle is a chill guy. He is the kind of dude that would give inmates more minutes on the phone to call with their wife. Provide them with a little extra comfort when they had it dire. Think solitary confinement. And was overall a human among imprisoned humans. This of course made him gain respect from the inmates, as he treated them like humans. However, in his last year, he substituted for one of his colleagues one night, and that was when shit went crazy. 5 inmates had very carefully planned out a breakout, which however had required a hostage. As they had some respect for my uncle, they didn't want to do it to him, and therefore specifically chose a day that he wouldn't be there. Yeah, they wanted to break out anyway, and if you set something in motion, you know, you can't stop a roller coaster when it has already started going down. So they took him hostage, and one of the inmates said while holding a gun to my uncle's head, "You aren't supposed to be here. Why the duck are you here?" My uncle was shocked. Quite logical if you ask me, and the other inmates made a run for it. He, the hostage taker, was shot in the knee, and that is when the inmates stopped the escape. Uncle made it out alive, had 2 paid weeks, and went on a de-traumatizing holiday with wife. TLDR. Uncle was at wrong time, wrong place. My dad used to work as a corrections officer, and he would never tell me any stories about his time there, until one day of constant badgering. He told me the tale of the Easter surprise. Easter morning, one of the inmates thought it would be a brilliant idea to get completely naked and shove a toilet scrubber all the way up his ass, so the only part visible was his bristled bunny tail. He then proceeded to scream that he was the Easter bunny, while trying to hop around and avoid the oncoming guards. Edit. Thanks for the gold, kind stranger. Not really disturbing in a traditional sense, but still made me uncomfortable. I'm a corrections officer at the Denver complex for the Department of Corrections. Seeing James Holmes, the Aurora Theater shooter, come through our processing after getting sentenced. I'd seen this man's face and heard the stories for 2 years on TV, but seeing him in person just slapped me in the face with a weird sense of reality. I don't really know what I expected, but it was pretty disturbing to me personally. If that doesn't count, then seeing an offender hanging from a sheet in their cell. Not me, but my cousin. One day she found a guy cutting his dick open and sticking tiny plastic balls inside the wounds, and the inmate wanted it to heal like that, so when he gets out it would pleasure the ladies. Edit. Not fixing my small typo. Not me, but a friend who worked in a state prison down south for a few years. On his first day of the job, a very tall, very intimidating inmate stood over him and said, I could kill you right now if I wanted to. Glad I don't work in a prison. I'd poop my pants. Not a prison officer, but my dad spent 26 years working as one in the UK. Brixton then Belmarsh. Heard a lot of crazy stories, including how the IRA prisoners used to be. Mess strikes used to happen frequently. They used to cover themselves in their own feces, wait for the guards to go into the cell, and attack them. They then just started hosing them down through the service flap. He also told me swallowing razor blades was fairly common amongst prisoners, although one time this guy didn't think that would be enough. So he slotted a bunch of razor blades amongst the bristles of a toilet brush, and then rammed the whole thing down his throat up to the handle. He lived. Inmates in a level 5 yard bunk. Up to a cell. One inmate decided to pledge himself to his cellie for life by allowing him to cut his testicles out with a repurposed safety razor blade. Much blood. 0 out of 10. Would not recommend. I'm a corrections officer at a max prison. I've seen an inmate lick his own shit off his walls. I've seen an inmate cut up where his cell floor was covered in blood. They will dilute it in water to make it look like there is more blood than there is. The inmate lived. And I've seen an inmate hog tie his cellie and put a plastic bag on his head, and then put his property box on top of his head. Inmates survived. Guys I've worked with have seen worse, like an inmate ripping open his guts, an inmate pulling chicken bones out of his urethra, and of course, inmates who have successfully hung themselves, or got beat to death by their cellie. An inmate in segregation got very upset that he didn't get some paper. A corrections officer promised to get him on his first shift. Effer ripped off his own big toenail and cut his arm up with it. Guy sculpted a parrot out of his own poo. He would place it on his shoulder and talk to it all the time. After 3 days, the smell was unbearable. On the 4th day, he refused to come out of his cell for a shakedown. He kept threatening to kill his parrot if we came to his cell. The second we opened the door to extract him, he grabs the poo parrot off his shoulder and bites the head off and chews it. That is probably the craziest/nastiest thing I've ever seen. Honey buns are routinely spent on sex as a currency. Also, the amount of ramen noodles a normal college student eats in a week would make you rich as fuck on the block. When I used to work in the jail, I initially thought people covering themselves and their cells in feces was as bad as it ever got. Then one of the inmates in my partner's cell block had a miscarriage into the toilet and smeared the afterbirth all over the cell door. Suddenly, a Picasso doesn't seem all that bad. I had a neighbor who was a corrections officer at a juvenile prison in my city. There was a new kid at the prison one day. He was apparently very shy and very quiet. He had the misfortune of sharing a cell with one of the more violent inmates. His second night there, his cellmate unscrewed a screw from a bench and sat on his bed in the middle of the night. When he woke up, he said, "I'm gonna make you a pirate," and shoved the screw into the new kid's eye. My neighbor was the first corrections officer to respond to the kid's calls for help. When asked why he shoved a screw in the new kid's eye, he claimed that he looked at him the wrong way. That's a pretty fucked up situation if you ask me, and not one I'd like to deal with under any circumstance. Fuck this thread. Too many dicks getting chopped off, and there's even a fucking pirate. My father has been a corrections officer for the past 10 years. One story that still sticks out to me today involves him routinely checking inmate cells. One cell in particular had inmates that kept to themselves for the most part. They hardly spoke to one another or the correction officers, except for this night. My dad had heard screaming in the typically quiet cell. As he approached, he saw inmate number 1 laying in bed resting as if nothing happened. Inmate number 2, however, was screaming/crying and appeared to be holding one of his eyeballs in his palm. It was dangling by the optic nerve and was turning grayish and foamy. They had to take him to the hospital in hopes of saving his eye. Come to find out, inmate number 1 decided to scoop his cellmate's eyeball out with a spoon because he wanted peace and quiet. There's other stories, but that, I will always remember that one. I was working a unit that has an open shower room with 12 showers. These showers are segregated by race. I had to monitor the showers to ensure there are no fights or fucking going on. There were 12 guys in the shower room. With dozens waiting their turn, a guy walked in fully clothed to confront another guy in the shower. I noticed outside the shower they were grouping up waiting to see what would happen. There are normally 3-4 officers in the area, so with 20-30 guys fighting, it would have been rough until backup arrived. Luckily, a group of about 10 new officers came in. Being shown the area by a sergeant, I knocked on the shower window to get the 2 guys' attention that were facing off. They looked over and saw the extra 10 guys and separated. What they didn't know was the 10 new officers were still in the academy and would not have been authorized to help break up the fight. The inmates didn't know this. I didn't want to have to break up a bunch of naked dudes fighting. And you've made it to the end. Thank you friends for listening to another story. I hope to see you again soon.